The horizon shifted in a way that meant trouble. A rolling cloud of dust and chitinous shapes moved across the obsidian plains, just at the edge of visual range. Not a storm. Nothing natural. It was the swarm. I lowered the binocs and let the gritty wind slice across my faceplate. They were coming in force. At least 12,000 Zarn, probably more. Couldn't be sure without aerial recon, and all our drones had either been shot down or repurposed into mobile mines. The ridge loomed behind me, jagged and burnt, like the earth had vomited up a row of blackened teeth. 287 Terran soldiers were spread across those teeth, dug in and wired tight. Most weren't even standard infantry. We had a handful of hardened Marines, a few orbital drop survivors, a scattering of colonial militia, and a bunch of engineers like me who'd stopped pretending we weren't front line. And we were the last thing standing between the swarm and the last shuttle off Calderis 4. I didn't join up to play hero. My background was in geotech and structural sabotage. Fancy words for blow up terrain in ways the enemy doesn't expect. But after 6 years of being deployed across hostile colony worlds, you either learned to hold a rifle like your toothbrush, or you stopped needing one entirely. Black Glass Ridge wasn't chosen by chance. We picked it, designed it, weaponized it. The obsidian cliffs had a natural advantage, sure, but it was what lay beneath that mattered most. Tunnels, slag veins, and a magma shelf deep enough to make the crust groan. I'd spent months down there, laying the framework. The place was half fortress, half pressure cooker, and when it blew, it wouldn't be gentle. The evac schedule was tight. One more shuttle of civilians and the ship in orbit would hit maximum load. After that, there wouldn't be anyone left to save. But us. Command's message was simple. Buy time. As much as we could. Hold the ridge, delay the enemy, and bleed them while the sky still had friendly ships in it. When the swarm came into full view, we were already on high alert. Across the ridge, perimeter guns whirred to life, turrets elevated, and suits powered up with a collective hum. The air shimmered with heat from still incorrective thermal vents, and the wind carried the sour stench of ash and dried plasma. Echo F4, movement confirmed. They're forming into assault clusters. Sergeant Tima reported over the channel. Her voice crackled with calm professionalism. She'd been a mining supervisor before all this. She knew how to keep her head when the ground started to shake. "They're pushing for the south slope," she added. "Looks like they're aiming to breach the lower trenches." "Perfect." That sector was rigged 3 layers deep. "Let them commit," I said. "When they start climbing, I want eyes on their forward ranks. Hold until my signal." "Copy that. We'll make them earn it." The Zarn weren't built for subtlety. They didn't probe or test defenses. They committed like fanatics. Dozens of armored forms broke from the pack and started scaling the rise, claws digging into the glassy surface like ice picks. Bioplasma cannons on their backs charged with a high-pitched whine, and a few opened fire, melting half a barricade before they were even in range. The rest of the swarm followed, rippling forward in a tide of mandibles and spines. 6 legs per body, scythe arms poised high, eyes glowing like embers. They were confident. Why wouldn't they be? They had numbers. They had speed. And we had the ridge. I waited until they hit the kill zone. Then I tapped the trigger. A deep tremor rolled through the slope. The thumpers kicked off first, seismic charges buried weeks earlier that turned loose rock into unstable gravel. The lead wave staggered, just enough confusion. Then came the vent rupture. An explosive gate blew open below their path, and a vertical jet of molten rock speared out of the hillside. Lava surged upward, catching the swarm's front line in mid-charge. Chitin cracked, boiled, and burst. Creatures screamed as their limbs melted. Others tried to climb over the burning wreckage, only to get pulled down by the next wave behind them. The slope turned into a furnace. And just like that, their momentum shattered. "Now!" I barked. "Light them up!" My gun lines opened up all at once. A wall of tracer fire sliced through the haze, cutting into anything that wasn't human. Heavy repeaters rattled off short, brutal bursts. Plasma mortars lobbed arcing death down into the chaos. Even some of the drones, rigged with shrapnel pods and remote igniters, rolled downhill and detonated in the thick of the swarm. The first attack collapsed in less than 5 minutes. We lost 2 gun nests to enemy plasma, but the line held. The ridge stood. And the Zorn? They'd just learned that rushing us head-on was about as smart as jumping into a meat grinder. Mazur, our acting lieutenant, approached my position as the smoke began to settle. She was soaked in sweat, helmet under one arm, rifle across her chest. Her face looked carved from stone, except for the smile creeping at the corner of her mouth. "They walked right into it," she said, nodding toward the mess. "That's the idea," I replied, brushing ash off my sleeve. "We built this place to punish assumptions." "They'll adapt," she warned. "They always do," I said, "but not fast enough." Check my slate again. New seismic feedback. Magma pressure under Sector Bravo was rising. A good sign. When it hit peak, we'd have another trick ready. Mazur stared out at the black plain. The swarm wasn't gone, not even close. They were regrouping, shifting, recalculating. But we'd hurt them. "They're going to hit us harder next time." "It might be better," I muttered, "because if they hold back, they'll never find out how deep this trap goes." Across the ridge, soldiers reloaded in silence. Engineers checked circuits. Medics worked in shallow cover. No one celebrated. Not properly. But I could see it in their eyes, a flicker of belief. We weren't just surviving out here. We were bleeding the bastards. And the ridge was only warming up. By midday, the wind shifted again. Heat came first. Dry, metallic heat that stuck in your mouth like burnt copper. Then came the tremors. Subtle but insistent. Caldera's 4 was talking. Or maybe it was the ridge, clearing its throat. I checked the pressure gauges lining the main control board at Sector Bravo's rear command post. Readouts flickered red in the lower shaft zone. The magma flow was close now, just waiting for a channel to bleed into. The Zarn didn't wait long to recover. They never did. Adaptation was their whole thing. Send in bodies until something sticks, then replicate the successful ones by the thousands. Brutal, dumb, and effective. This time they came from 3 angles: south, southeast, and a frontal charge right up the center. Not elegant, but faster. We could hear the ground tremble under their weight, claws hammering into stone like 1,000 pickaxes. Deep to their armor. Looked thicker, especially around the front limbs and thorax. Maybe their gene printers were working overtime. Wouldn't matter. We weren't shooting bullets this time. We were about to let the ridge answer for itself. "Bravo team, hold fire, wait for detonation mark," I said, fingers resting just above the surface of the trigger pad. The Zarn vanguard reached the trench line at Sector Bravo in under 4 minutes. This time, they tried leap tactics. Bounding forward in waves, using the bodies of their dead as elevation. Not smart. Too smart. I gave them credit. Then I gave them a lesson. I punched the control slate. 100 meters of hillside vanished in a controlled collapse. The top layer, carefully weakened over days, gave way instantly, dropping a few dozen Zarn into a cavern I'd lovingly called the Oven. The Oven wasn't a nickname. It was literal. As the cavern opened, blast valves deep below triggered the magma routing gates. We'd rerouted pressure from a long-dead vent line, forcing superheated gas and molten rock into a confined tunnel. When it hit the open air, the result was biblical. A wave of orange-red fury belched upward. The shriek of boiling Zarn echoed across the ridge like music from Hell's own brass section. For a moment, even the ones outside the drop zone paused. I don't blame them. 1 second their path was solid stone, the next it was an inferno. Then our guns opened up without hesitation. Bravo Team poured fire into the staggered remains of the forward assault. Slug throwers, chemical burners, kinetic drills. Everything that had been jury-rigged into a weapon came alive. I watched from behind cover as a reinforced Zarn brute got hit by a mining drill launched like a spear. The steel rod pinned it to the slope, still twitching. One of the colonials tossed a homemade sticky charge right into its open mouth. It exploded with a satisfying whump that showered the trench with acidic gore. We kept losing positions, just not the ones that mattered. A few shallow bunkers melted under bioplasma. 2 more drones went offline after one of the Zarn spit some kind of conductive goo into their wiring. We adapted faster. That's the thing about humans. We don't just fight dirty, we fight smart. Tima's voice came through my comm again. Sir, northern flank is quiet. Too quiet. You think they're tunneling? Wouldn't surprise me, I replied. They've seen the surface isn't working. We cut into their lines, they'll dig into ours. Want me to light the mole traps? Negative. Wait till we know they're committed. Let 'em crawl all the way in. Back at Central Command, Mazur stared at the updated tactical map. The enemy was splitting up now, testing terrain, trying to find new weak spots. She leaned on the map table, eyes scanning the zones we hadn't hit yet. You are forcing them to think, she muttered. Not their strength, I said, but it's when they start thinking that they get dangerous. She tapped a red sector. Delta 5? Layered with crush plates and reactive slurry. We can turn it into a landslide at a moment's notice. Good, she said. If they send a heavy force through it, bury the bastards. Half an hour later, the ridge shook again. This one wasn't us. The Zarn were coming in waves now. Pressure from 3 sides, coordinated for the first time. We had minutes, maybe less, before they hit Delta 5 and Echo 1 simultaneously. It was the moment the whole defense had been building toward. I ran with Tima along the lower trench, ducking under stray fire. Plasma scorched the edge of the barricade above us. She slid into position beside a control panel embedded in the wall. Delta's getting pounded, she called out. You sure about this landslide trap? I didn't answer right away. I was watching the drone feed, hundreds of them pouring in, no hesitation now. They thought they'd cracked our rhythm. So I smiled and flipped the switch. A mix of old mining sediment, unstable rock, and chemically volatile goo ignited with a chain of low booms. The slope above Delta 5 collapsed in on itself, burying the enemy column under thousands of tons of pulverized rock. For 10 seconds there was silence. Then the trapped Zarn began shrieking, trying to claw their way free. Mazur's voice came in over comms. You hearing this? Yeah, I replied. The ridge likes to talk. We lost 27 people that day. Too many. Some got taken out by flanking burrowers. One squad fell back too slow and was overrun before the lava traps kicked in. We marked every loss. We always did. But we held. We hurt them. By the end of the 3rd wave, the blackened fields around the ridge were littered with broken armor and scorched bodies. The Zarn didn't retreat. They never did. But they'd stopped rushing. Now they were reassessing, trying to understand what kind of enemy digs in and changes the battlefield under their feet. That night, we reinforced what we could, salvaged from the wrecks, and reset the traps. Beneath our boots, the planet growled. Mazur sat beside me under the overhang, sipping water like it was whiskey. "They'll try a new angle next," she said. "Burrow, flank, maybe some airborne bullshit." "Let them," I replied, thumbing a remote detonator the size of my palm. "They haven't seen what's under the ridge yet." Her smile was tired, but it was there. "We're making them pay for every inch." "Damn right," I said, "and by the time they get close enough to win, there won't be anything left." By the time night fell on the ridge, the world had turned the color of dried blood. The last sun dipped behind the obsidian skyline, and with it went any illusion of calm. Calderis 4 didn't get quiet at night. It listened. The planet was alive, and tonight it was holding its breath. Down in the lower trenches, steam hissed through every crack, and the glow of buried magma gave the air a low red pulse, like a heartbeat under stone. The ridge was warming again. Not just from pressure, but from movement below. We'd predicted the tunneling eventually. You can't press a swarm of dig-adapted aliens and expect them to keep hitting walls. Their frontline brutes had slowed, but the specialized morphs, smaller, faster, equipped with acid-dripped mandibles and hardened forelimbs, had started flanking through the crust itself. We'd laid charges. Seismic listeners, traps made from old mining drills sharpened down to piercing tips. We didn't just anticipate the tunnels, we built them to lure the Zarn in. There's something fundamentally satisfying about turning your enemy's strength into their grave. I was in the command nest reviewing the vibration logs when the first breach alert hit. Sector Charlie. Depth marker, 32 meters. Movement speed, fast. Too fast for random burrowers. This was a full-on infiltration attempt. I was already moving when the second breach sounded. Then the third. They were coming in clusters. "Tima, cut the lights in the lower tunnels. Full blackout. I want motion sensors only." "Copy. And spin up the echo chambers. We're gonna make it loud." Echo chambers were an old engineer trick. Directional sonic feedback set to resonate inside artificial shafts. Down in the dark, with no eyes and nothing but crawling echo noise bouncing off the rock walls, even a confident swarm starts making mistakes. Especially when the walls start screaming back. He'd rigged the speakers to cycle between pre-recorded tunnel collapse sounds, predator calls from native Calderan wildlife, and, for flavor, some heavily distorted human laughter. That one had been my idea. Psychological warfare doesn't need to be clean, it just needs to work. The first Zarn cluster burst through a weak point in a maintenance shaft below Delta Sector. Tima had a scout drone posted just above the entrance, hiding in the rock lattice. It caught the whole thing in infrared. 8 of them, scuttling in fast, dripping acid saliva, and moving in perfect sync. The drone's mic picked up their footfalls. Hundreds of legs clicking like dry bone over tile. And I waited until the second wave was halfway through. Then I hit the switch. The floor underneath them folded like cardboard. Seismic rods on both sides collapsed inward, and 20 tons of stabilized mining slurry suspended above their path in a pocket cavity came crashing down like liquid stone. The screams didn't last long, but the echo chamber made sure they kept going. Back on the surface, the night lit up again. They'd launched another coordinated surface attack, probably to pull our attention from the tunnel incursion. And maybe that would have worked if we hadn't expected it. Mazur was already directing artillery fire from the North Ridge. She didn't shout. Never did. Her voice stayed flat, calm, even when the shells rained down so close that they scorched her boots. I joined her on the overlook just as the main charge began. The Zarn had pulled together something new. Looked like a breacher unit the size of a dropship, plated in black chitin, half alive and half machine, grinding across the slag fields like a land-bound battleship. It had plasma ports along the side and what looked like a living ram in the front. A massive horned organism, eyes glowing, flesh bound in fused armor plating. They were bringing siege units now. So, we gave them a welcome. Dia. Tima had been waiting for just this kind of toy. The breacher rolled straight into range Sector Alpha, right into a kill funnel that looked open but had two collapsed structures rigged for chain reaction. The first blast took out its side port. The second ruptured the belly. The third wasn't a charge at all. It was an old mining drill, mounted sideways, dragged up from the refinery wrecks, and timed to activate when triggered by pressure sensors. The drill punched through its core and kept spinning until the damn thing started screaming. I didn't know a siege engine could scream. Good to learn something new. Don't. The cost was starting to show. Ammo was low. Power reserves were being rerouted from comfort systems. Lights, heat, even filtered air in some sectors. The wounded were being cycled back to the fallback line. And most of us hadn't slept in nearly 2 days. But no one broke. Not one. Because every time the enemy tried to adapt, we adapted faster, dirtier, meaner. We didn't hold the high ground because we were stronger. We held it because we understood it better. We had turned this hellhole into an extension of ourselves. Our hate, our grit, our refusal to die easy. Later that night, while patching a breach in a tunnel ceiling, I found myself shoulder-deep in slag and oil, rewiring a ruptured detonation coil. Major climbed down to check on the southern charges. "You're bleeding," she said without much concern. "A surface wound," I grunted, reseating the connector. Was closer than I like to one of the breachers. She passed me a sealed patch. "You let one of those plasma vents go off in your face again, and I'm writing you up for damage to military property." I cracked a smile. It's nice to be appreciated. Then, we both froze. A rumble, low and steady, rolled through the wall behind us. Not from above. From within. Another tunnel incursion. Deeper this time. Far below our current position. I pulled up the scan grid on my HUD. It wasn't just a small team anymore. It was a mass movement. At least 50 signatures. They'd found a natural lava tube and were using it as a bypass. Spark. Would have been a good move. As if we hadn't booby-trapped that tube 6 days ago. I keyed into the central trigger net and armed the last layer of fail-safes. Tima's voice came through again, breathless. "They're trying to crawl through the old vent line. You ready? Let them." I watched the signatures move, one by one, into the narrowed zone. Then I pulled the pin on the seismic throat. The detonation didn't sound like an explosion. It sounded like the planet groaning. The tube cracked inward and collapsed, triggering a chain reaction along the adjacent molten veins. The force vented into a fault line we'd been nursing for weeks. The temperature spike alone would have flash-cooked anything inside. But the real damage? That came when the blast reverberated through the ridge. Every tunnel, every shaft, every stone chamber echoed the noise of a world roaring in pain. And all of it was aimed downward. For the first time in the campaign, we saw the Zarn retreat. The next morning, I stood atop the northern overlook, with half a ration bar in one hand and a sensor pad in the other. Tima walked up beside me. She was covered in grime, her face streaked with black soot, hair tied back with a strip of bandage. She looked like hell. 36 hours since the main force hit, she said. We've held. I nodded. The ridge smoked gently in the distance, still glowing from the lava bursts. They'll be back, I said. They're not done. She looked out across the field of broken bodies and melted stone. Neither are we. By the time the sun dipped behind Calderis's burnt horizon for what felt like the 10th time in 3 days, the ridge looked less like a fortress and more like the jagged spine of something primal clawing its way up from the planet's molten heart. Black, cracked, steaming, and utterly unyielding. And beneath that crust of stone and steel, 300 humans, or what remained of us, prepared to make damn sure this would be the last time the Zarn ever underestimated our species. And Mazur stood next to me atop the inner overlook platform, one arm slung into a makeshift sling, armor half welded back together from 3 separate suits, face smeared in soot, but her eyes still sharp as broken glass. She didn't say anything at first. Just watched the wave build in the distance. 12,000 Zarn, reformed and refocused into a single mass of chittering hate. They're throwing it all, she muttered eventually, tunneling from the sides, ramming the center, flyers up top. I nodded, checking the power feeds on my wrist slate, seeing that final sequence sitting idle in its cage, waiting for the key. They've stopped adapting, I replied. This isn't strategy anymore. It's desperation with claws. He snorted. Not a laugh exactly, but it had a note of approval in it. So, a fair fight, finally. The swarm reached the lower trenches before we even finished reinforcing the barricades, but we met them with everything that hadn't melted or jammed. Tima's team, running on 2 hours of sleep across the last 2 days, popped up from repurposed mining tunnels and dropped charges point-blank under siege walkers. The ex-miner-turned-gunner we'd nicknamed Slugger managed to rip a plasma cannon off a dead bio-artillery beast, hook it to a jury-rigged coolant loop, and turn it against the enemy until the thing burst in his arms, taking half his faceplate with it and earning him a battlefield promotion and a kill count that would make a gunship blush. Still, it wasn't enough to stop the sheer weight of what was coming. They breached the outer line, swarmed over the first trench, and started carving into Delta Sector with scythe limbs and pressurized acid blasts that melted bulkheads like candle wax. And while our people held, inch by inch, stone by stone, the cracks were widening. Exactly as planned. I dropped in to central control, just as the quake sensors on the southern ridgeline spiked. That wasn't natural tectonic movement. That was the final tunnel breach coming through. Right on time. The Zarn had tunneled deeper than ever, just far enough to be within the collapse radius of the seismic network we'd buried so deep it registered as part of the damn crust. Mazur had already patched into the command net. She wasn't wasting time with inspirational speeches, not when the air smelled like melted ceramite and adrenaline. All she said was, "Get your teams out of the blast zones. Final sequence arms in 60 seconds. At that exact moment, something new crackled through the comms. A signal hijack. And for the first time since this war had started, the Zarn commander hailed us directly. The image that appeared on the main screen was a mess of twitching mandibles, writhing sensory fronds, and grotesquely augmented armor. Half their commander's chitin was covered in scavenged gear from fallen humans, like he thought wearing our tech would make him clever enough to beat us with it. He stood atop a pile of scorched equipment and broken bodies, his voice filtered through a brutalized translation drone that buzzed and warped like a dying insect. "You are broken. You are outnumbered. You will die here. Surrender, and we will make your extinction painless." Azur stared at the feed like she was watching a bad soap opera, then leaned forward, tapped the transmit line, and replied with all the calm of someone 3 seconds from flipping a planetary kill switch. "You climbed over our dead, crawled through our fire, and now you're standing on a minefield built from your own arrogance. You think you've trapped us here? No, we've baited you here." She cut the line. Then she looked at me and said, "Trigger it." I keyed in the final sequence. The screen lit green. Below us, deep within the bones of the ridge, the lowest buried charges began to cycle, one after another. A ripple of chained ignition signals echoing through magma vents, pressurized seismic corridors, and crust-bound tunnel arteries that had once served the colony's mining operations. Now, they served a very different purpose. The ridge began to rumble, not like before. Not the warning tremors or strategic detonations. This was a full-body shudder, the kind of sound that made bones ache, that made the air vibrate in your chest. From the outer slope to the inner bastion, the entire structure started to move. Not collapse, but shift, as if the mountain itself was coming alive. And Azarn? They had just marched right into the throat of something they didn't even realize had teeth. From high above, we could see it all, the cracks widening, the magma breaching surface vents in controlled lines, the central plateau collapsing inward in a calculated chain of implosions that opened up the earth like a splitting skull. The Zarn didn't break ranks. They couldn't. They were too deep inside. Fire took them first, then the ground. They screamed and clawed and vanished into a tide of molten rock and atmospheric compression so intense it sent shockwaves across the valley. Their commander, still visible for a brief instant on the drone feed, stood motionless as the ground beneath him vanished. For one glorious heartbeat, it looked like he understood. Then he was gone. Silence came next. Not the peaceful kind, the stunned, heavy kind. The sound of the planet exhaling after it's tasted blood and been fed well. Tima's voice came through the comm, rough, dry, but still standing. "Is that it?" Mazur looked out over the ridge. Or what was left of it. What had once been a fortress now looked like a crater from a God's-damned orbital strike. Glowing veins of magma pulsed between shattered peaks, and the enemy was nowhere in sight. She turned, lowered her rifle, and finally, smiled. That's it. The evac ship's transmission came through minutes later, tracking the seismic event and requesting confirmation. When they asked how many of us were left, I checked the roster. 49 names. Some of them barely walking, some bleeding from places you shouldn't be able to bleed. Some already joking about how many metals they'd be able to melt down and sell if Command survived the paperwork. I keyed the mic and replied, "Ridge held, civilians clear, mission accomplished." At sunrise, Calderas 4 didn't look like a planet anymore. It looked like the scene of a crime committed by the planet itself. What was once Black Glass Ridge had become a glowing, broken wound carved into the crust. The sky was still choked with ash, the air too hot to breathe without a rebreather, and the ground radiated the kind of heat that could bake a man alive from the knees down if he stood in the wrong place too long. But there were no more Zarn. Not one. Just a field of smoldering silence where 12,000 of them had charged and died inside a weapon they thought was a mountain. When the evac dropship finally pierced the haze, it came in cautious, slow, as if afraid of waking whatever force had just erupted across the battlefield. The crew disembarked, looking dazed, scanning the terrain like they expected ghosts to rise from the slag. Mazur greeted them herself, still armored, still standing tall despite the bandaged leg and cracked chest plate. "We've got survivors," she told them. 49. The recovery officer blinked. "That's all that's left?" Mazur didn't flinch. That's all it took. After we boarded the ship, they asked what happened down there. Later, the brass called it an unprecedented defensive action. Analysts tried to map our tactics. Engineers studied the terrain. Recruits whispered our names during drills. Some idiot even suggested turning the blast site into a monument. We told them to leave it as it was. Let the glass and fire speak for itself. And when someone, usually a young officer who hadn't seen real combat yet, would ask me what it felt like to hold the line at Black Glass Ridge, I'd just shake my head, lean back, and give them the only answer that ever mattered. We weren't defending the ridge. We were the ridge. We didn't survive by luck or numbers. We turned a mountain into a grave. And we reminded the galaxy of one unshakable truth. Humanity doesn't just hold the line, we build it. Then we dare you to cross it.